I am Cassidy, 33 years old, and until a crisp Tuesday afternoon in October, I was the anonymous, silent benefactor keeping my family's fraudulent luxury lifestyle afloat. Then my phone vibrated against the polished wood. The notification displayed a video message from my Aunt Carol. Carol is a remarkably sweet woman, but notoriously terrible with technology. Instead, the screen filled with the high-definition image of my sister's sunlit patio. My family was raising expensive crystal champagne flutes, toasting to their own supposed greatness. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to surgically cut off toxic family members to finally protect your own peace. I stood up from my desk and looked down through the floor-to-ceiling glass of my corner office. Below me, 500,000 square feet of polished concrete hummed with relentless, orchestrated activity. But to my parents, Richard and Patricia, to my sister Brittany, and to her flashy husband Jamal, I was just a sad, struggling inventory clerk who moved cardboard boxes for an hourly minimum wage. I preferred it that way, because I showed up to family dinners in a simple discount store sweater and drove a reliable, 12-year-old faded Toyota sedan. They viewed me with absolute, unfiltered contempt. They saw me as the dark, embarrassing mark on their curated social image. 4 years ago, my parents were on the brink of absolute financial ruin. They had secretly remortgaged their sprawling suburban home to fund a series of foolish, speculative investments simply to keep up appearances at their affluent country club. Instead, I used my elite wealth management attorneys to establish a blind corporate entity. Through this anonymous limited liability company, I aggressively purchased their distressed debt. I did the exact same thing for my younger sister, Brittany, and her husband, Jamal. Jamal is a real estate agent who loved to boast endlessly about his multi-million-dollar commercial listings on social media, projecting the image of a high-powered corporate mogul. Every single month, on the fourth day of the month, I sat at my executive desk and authorized a massive, silent wire transfer to keep their fragile house of cards from collapsing. Today was the 4th of the month. The banking portal was open on my monitor. Then Aunt Carol's video arrived. The text beneath the file read, "Look how much fun we had at Brittany's house yesterday." It was clearly meant for my cousin in Florida, but her clumsy fingers had selected my contact name instead. I pressed play. The video showed an extravagant afternoon gathering. The heavy teak patio table was laden with imported cheeses, artisan crackers, and a massive silver ice bucket holding 3 bottles of vintage champagne. Those bottles alone cost more than what they believed my weekly warehouse salary was. My mother, Patricia, was leaning back in a plush lounge chair, her hair blown out, holding a crystal flute. My father, Richard, was laughing heartily at a joke Jamal had just delivered. "I am just saying," Jamal announced to the camera, his voice dripping with heavy condescension. "We really need to stop inviting Cassidy to these daytime events. Did you see her pull up in that rusted-out Toyota last week? It makes the whole driveway look like a junkyard. It is honestly embarrassing for the neighborhood." My sister, Brittany, stepped into the frame, tossing her long blonde extensions over her shoulder. "Tell me about it," she laughed, taking a long sip of champagne. "I literally had to tell my neighbors." She was the hired cleaning help. "I cannot have people thinking I am related to someone who shops at discount stores." The camera panned slightly as Aunt Carol, holding the phone, chuckled along with them. Then my mother spoke up, her voice cutting through the sunny afternoon air with casual, practiced cruelty. "She is a pathetic failure," Patricia said, waving her hand dismissively, her diamond rings catching the sunlight. "I honestly do not know where she came from. She has zero ambition. We should honestly start charging her an admission fee just to sit at our table." The video ended with a loud chorus of unified, mocking laughter. The screen went black, reflecting my own calm face in the dark glass of my phone. I sat in the absolute quiet of my soundproof office. I did not cry, I did not scream, the dull constant ache of trying to win my family's love, An ache I had carried in my chest for over 3 decades suddenly evaporated. I looked back at my computer monitor. The green Forternize button was still waiting for my click. $15,000 of my hard-earned capital, ready to be sent to people who sat on furniture I paid for, drinking champagne I essentially financed, while calling me a pathetic failure to my face. They had no idea that the foundation of their entire existence rested on a single click of my mouse. I reached out, my hands steady. I did not click authorize. I dragged the cursor a few inches to the left. I clicked cancel. Then, I picked up my office phone and dialed my wealth management attorney to ensure the automatic grace periods on all their accounts were officially terminated. The countdown to their utter ruin had officially begun. "David," I said into the receiver the moment he answered the private line. "I need you to execute an immediate cessation of all automated disbursements from the Vanguard LLC account. Terminate the grace periods across the board." David paused on the other end of the line. As the primary architect of the Blind Trust, he knew what those specific accounts funded. "Cassidy, if we stop the disbursements today, the mortgage on the Chicago property and the auto leases will go into immediate, unrecoverable default. That is what I want," I replied, my voice devoid of any hesitation. "Send the default notices to their physical addresses through the standard legal channels. I do not want them to know the LLC is connected to me. Let the banks and the repossession agencies handle the dirty work." David confirmed the orders, and the call ended. I sat back in my chair and looked out over my warehouse. For 4 years I had justified my secret financial support as a twisted form of familial duty. I had convinced myself that keeping them afloat was the right thing to do, even if they treated me like dirt. 3 days later, the Thanksgiving holiday arrived. My mother, Patricia, had texted me early that morning with her usual list of arrogant demands. "Cassidy, make sure you bring that expensive Napa Cabernet, not the cheap grocery store swill you usually buy." I did not argue. I bought the exact wine she demanded. I even went to the local bank branch and withdrew 5 crisp $100 bills. I knew, with absolute certainty, that it would be the very last physical cash they ever saw from me. I drove my 12-year-old Toyota up the sweeping, manicured driveway of my parents' sprawling colonial estate in the upscale Chicago suburbs. The irony of the situation was palpable: the towering oak trees, the pristine brickwork, the grand double doors. I legally owned every single inch of it. I walked up the stone steps and rang the doorbell. Brittany threw the heavy door open. She was wearing a designer silk dress that my money had indirectly paid for, holding a glass of expensive wine. "Oh, you are here," Brittany said, her tight smile deliberately not reaching her eyes. She looked me up and down, taking in my plain dark jeans and simple, unbranded wool sweater. "I guess you did not get the memo about dressing up for the holidays. Did you just get off a shift at the warehouse?" "Something like that," I said quietly, stepping inside the warm house. The air smelled richly of roasted turkey and expensive, imported spices. In the grand foyer, Jamal was holding court with my father, Richard. Jamal was wearing a custom-tailored velvet blazer, a thick gold chain resting against his dark skin. When he saw me, he did not even bother to hide his condescending smirk. "Cassidy," Jamal called out, his voice booming through the echoing foyer. "I saw that piece of junk you parked in the driveway. Man, you are bringing down the property value of the whole neighborhood. You really need to upgrade. I just closed a massive deal on a downtown commercial penthouse last week." It was a blatant, pathetic lie. I knew for a strict financial fact that Jamal had not closed a single real estate deal in 6 months. His broker license was barely active. He was surviving purely on the massive credit cards that my LLC was paying off. "I will keep that in mind, Jamal," I said smoothly, handing my simple coat to the uniformed maid my parents had hired for the evening. My father, Richard, swirled his expensive bourbon glass and shook his head at me in mock disappointment. "Your brother-in-law is trying to help you, Cassidy. You should listen to him. Jamal understands how the world works. Richard is right, my mother." Patricia chimed in, emerging from the gourmet kitchen with a silver plate of hors d'oeuvre. She snatched the expensive wine bottle from my hands without a single word of thanks. We were just talking about how embarrassing it is to explain your situation to our friends at the country club. She sighed heavily, playing the practiced part of the long-suffering mother. It is exhausting constantly covering for you, Cassidy. I stood in the center of the grand foyer, surrounded by their suffocating arrogance. I looked at Jamal's flashy jewelry, at Brittany's designer dress, at my parents' smug, satisfied faces. They were standing in a multi-million-dollar house I was about to let the bank aggressively seize. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the plain white envelope containing the $500 in cash, and placed it calmly on the entryway console. My contribution for the catering, I said quietly. Patricia snatched the envelope immediately, her manicured fingers quickly counting the crisp bills. Well, it is the bare minimum, but I suppose it will do. Try not to make a scene at dinner, Cassidy. We have a lot to celebrate today. We moved into the formal dining room, a massive space dominated by a heavy mahogany table, laden with an extravagant catered feast. As we took our seats, Richard raised his crystal goblet, aggressively demanding everyone's attention. I want to propose a toast to Jamal, Richard announced, his voice swelling with unearned pride. He just secured another multi-million-dollar commercial property, officially securing his place as one of the top agents in the city. He is the kind of ambitious, successful man this family needs, a true provider. Jamal grinned broadly, wrapping a possessive arm around Brittany, who beamed as if she had personally earned the imaginary commission. They clinked their crystal glasses, basking in the fraudulent, empty praise. I sipped my ice water, watching the pathetic performance unfold. As the toast concluded, Patricia set her glass down and turned her sharp, calculating gaze directly toward me. The celebratory mood in the room shifted instantly into something predatory. Speaking of financial moves, Patricia began, her tone carrying a dangerous, demanding edge. Brittany has a brilliant business opportunity to launch her own exclusive luxury lifestyle brand. It is going to be incredibly lucrative, but she needs a little more seed capital to secure the initial inventory. She leaned forward, locking her cold eyes with me. Since you have no husband, no children, and no real expenses living in whatever tiny apartment you rent, your father and I have decided it is time for you to contribute to this family properly. I looked around the mahogany table, letting the sheer, terrifying audacity of my mother's demand settle in the air. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the roasted turkey and silver platters, highlighting the absolute absurdity of this moment. Brittany leaned forward, flashing a manicured smile that looked more like a predator baring its teeth. It is just a temporary loan, Cassidy. My brand is going to explode next quarter. You know I have over 100,000 followers now. Brands are literally begging to work with me, Jamal chimed in, pointing his heavy silver fork directly at me. Exactly. You have got to let your money work for you, Cass. Sitting on a measly 401k is a rookie mistake. You invest in family, we scale Brittany's brand, and you get to ride our coattails to a better tax bracket. It is a massive win for everyone. My father, Richard, nodded in solemn agreement, slowly slicing into his turkey. Family supports family, Cassidy. Jamal and Brittany are building a lasting legacy. Your mother and I have given you everything, and it is time you showed some actual gratitude. Liquidate the account on Monday morning. They had it all planned out. They had already aggressively spent my money in their minds. I set my fork down quietly. The sharp clink of the silver against the fine china echoed in the sudden, tense silence of the room. I looked directly at my mother, then at my father, and finally at my sister. No, I said. The single word hung there, sharp and incredibly. Patricia frowned deeply, clearly thinking she had somehow misheard me. Excuse me? Patricia demanded. No, I repeated, keeping my voice level and devoid of emotion. I will not be liquidating my retirement savings to fund a vanity project. My finances are my own private business, and they are not open for family distribution. The mask slipped instantly. The fake, patronizing smiles vanished entirely, replaced by a vicious, ugly entitlement that I had witnessed my entire life. Patricia slammed her hand flat against the mahogany table. How dare you speak to us like that? Patricia shrieked. We ask you for one simple favor, one single opportunity to actually contribute to this family. And you sit there acting like some arrogant miser. You are incredibly selfish, Cassidy. Richard's face flushed with deep anger. He pointed a stern, shaking finger at me. Do not be stupid. You work in a warehouse. You have zero financial literacy. We are offering you a chance to be part of something successful. You owe your sister this support. You owe us. I owe you nothing, I replied, my voice remaining unnervingly calm. I pay my own bills. I live within my means. I have never once asked any of you for a single dime. Yet, you feel entitled to the money I have worked for, simply because Brittany refuses to get a real job. And Jamal's real estate career is fictitious. Jamal shot up from his chair, the heavy wood scraping violently against the hardwood floor. Watch your mouth. You have no idea what you are talking about. I close deals you could not even comprehend. Brittany burst into dramatic, theatrical tears, burying her face in her hands. Why is she always like this? Brittany sobbed loudly. She always has to ruin everything. She is so bitter and jealous of my life that she would rather watch me fail than help me succeed. I cannot stand her toxic negative energy. My mother rushed to comfort her golden child, glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. Look at what you have done. You are a bitter, lonely spinster, Cassidy. You are a pathetic failure who cannot stand to see anyone else happy. You bring nothing but intense embarrassment to this family. I looked at the four of them. For 33 years, these terrible people had intentionally made me feel incredibly small. They had aggressively criticized my clothes, mocked my career, and treated my mere existence as a heavy burden. But the video Aunt Carol sent was the absolute truth. This dinner was the truth. They did not love me. They only loved what they could extract from me. I picked up my heavy cloth napkin, wiped my mouth deliberately, and placed it neatly on the table. Then I stood up. You are right, Mother, I said smoothly. I do not belong at this table. I walked calmly out of the dining room and into the grand foyer. I retrieved my simple wool coat from the hall closet. My father followed me out, his face purple with intense rage. If you walk out that door, you are done. Richard shouted, his voice echoing violently. Do not expect us to bail you out when you end up broke and alone. We are cutting you off. You will get nothing from us ever again. I slipped my arms into my coat and turned to face him. I looked past him, taking in the sweeping staircase, the massive crystal chandelier, the imported marble floors. My house. I hope you all maintain this exact level of luxury next week, I said, offering him a cold, bright smile. Enjoy the rest of your holiday. I opened the heavy mahogany door and stepped out into the freezing November night. I did not look back. I walked down the long driveway, got into my 12-year-old Toyota, and started the engine. As I drove away from the massive estate, I pulled over on a quiet, dimly lit suburban street. When I merged onto the highway, heading back to the city, I turned the radio off and drove in complete silence. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried my entire life was gone. I felt lighter than air. I knew what was coming. The 5th of the month was only a few days away. The bank grace periods were gone. The 5th of November arrived with a bitter chill that swept off Lake Michigan, but the real freeze was happening deep within the digital servers of the banking systems. At midnight, the final grace period for the Vanguard Limited Liability Company accounts officially expired. At 2 in the afternoon, Brittany was lounging in a plush, monogrammed robe at an ultra-luxury wellness retreat in downtown Chicago. She was holding court with two of her wealthy socialite friends, Madison and Taylor. Brittany had spent the entire morning treating them to the most expensive services the facility offered. You really have to spend money to make money, Brittany bragged, sipping a glass of cucumber-infused water as they lounged in the relaxation room. Jamal always tells me that my aesthetic is our best marketing tool. Madison and Taylor exchanged a polite, polished smile. They were old money, the kind of women who never talked about price tags, which made Brittany's constant bragging incredibly tacky. Still, They were more than happy to let her pick up the tab. The three women changed back into their designer clothes and strolled toward the grand marble reception desk. The spa interior was a masterpiece of minimalist luxury, filled with the scent of eucalyptus and the soft sound of ambient music. A groomed receptionist stood behind the counter, typing at a sleek computer terminal. "Checking out for Brittany," my sister announced, leaning aggressively against the marble counter with a practiced, arrogant posture. She reached into her quilted leather handbag and retrieved a heavy metal credit card. It was the card directly linked to the joint account my company had been secretly funding. "Of course," the receptionist said, offering a warm, professional smile. "I hope you and your guests enjoyed your treatments today. Your total comes to $1,540. Brittany did not even blink at the large number. She simply waved her hand dismissively, waiting for the familiar sound of an approved transaction, so she could bask in the admiration of her friends. The receptionist inserted the heavy metal card into the terminal. The machine emitted a harsh, jarring beep. It was a sharp, ugly sound that shattered the serene atmosphere of the lobby. The receptionist frowned slightly, pulling the card out and inspecting the chip. "I am sorry, ma'am. It seems the card was declined. Let me just try running it again." "Sometimes the connection is a bit slow," Brittany scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes and looking back at Madison and Taylor. "Your machine is obviously broken," she said, her voice dripping with deep condescension. "Do you have any idea what the limit is on that account?" "Just run it again." The receptionist swiped the card a second time. Another loud, aggressive beep echoed through the lobby. A red light flashed on the terminal screen. "I apologize, ma'am," the receptionist said, her professional warmth dropping a few degrees. "The terminal is displaying a message from your bank. The account has been frozen due to severe delinquency. Do you happen to have another form of payment?" Brittany's face burned a violent shade of crimson. She could feel the eyes of her friends burning into the back of her head. Panic began to claw at her throat, but her narcissism quickly overrode her logic. "That is impossible," Brittany snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "My husband is a top-tier real estate broker. There are hundreds of thousands of dollars in that account. Your system is making a massive mistake." She snatched her purse and frantically dug through it, pulling out a different card. This one was tied to Jamal's supposed business account. She slapped the plastic violently onto the marble counter. "Run this one, and I expect a serious apology from your manager for this extreme embarrassment." The receptionist picked up the second card with a tight, unamused expression. She inserted it into the machine. "Beep, declined, ma'am," the receptionist said, her voice now devoid of any customer service pretense. "This card is also declining for insufficient funds. I need a valid form of payment for the services rendered today." The ambient music in the lobby suddenly felt deafening. Madison and Taylor took a collective step back, physically distancing themselves from the radioactive humiliation radiating off my sister. Brittany went into a complete meltdown. "Do you know who I am? I have over 100,000 followers. I will destroy this spa. I will post about how your fraudulent machines steal from clients and embarrass them. Get your manager out here right now." The spa manager, who had been observing the commotion from a nearby glass office, walked out immediately. She did not look intimidated. She looked furious. "Ma'am, lower your voice immediately, or I will have security escort you out," the manager warned coldly. "You have received over $1,500 in premium services. If you cannot produce a working credit card right now, I am calling the police to report a severe theft of services." Brittany froze, the threat of police involvement instantly piercing through her hysterical rage. She looked back at Madison and Taylor, her eyes wide with desperate pleading. Madison let out a heavy, disappointed sigh. She opened her own purse, pulled out a sleek black card, and handed it to the manager. "Put it on mine," Madison said quietly. Taylor looked at Brittany with an expression of absolute disgust and pity, the ultimate social death sentence. "Let us go," Madison Taylor muttered. I think Brittany needs to figure out her financial situation before she invites us out again." The two women paid the massive bill and walked out the glass doors, leaving Brittany standing alone at the reception desk. Her curated influencer facade had just been incinerated in front of the exact people she was desperately trying to impress. Brittany stumbled out of the spa and into the freezing Chicago wind. She was shaking uncontrollably, gasping for air as she rushed blindly down the sidewalk. Her mind scrambled to find a target for her rage, and as always it landed squarely on me. In her warped, delusional mind, she was convinced that I had simply forgotten to transfer the $2,000 family tax they had demanded at Thanksgiving. She was aggressively preparing to scream at me, to blame me for her humiliation, and to order me to wire money into her account immediately. Instead of a ringing tone, she was met with a stark, automated voice. "The number you are trying to reach is currently unavailable." Brittany stopped walking. She pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at the screen. She opened her text messages and sent an angry, expletive-filled paragraph, demanding I answer the phone. A red exclamation point appeared next to the text. Not delivered. She stood frozen on the busy downtown sidewalk as the horrific reality finally began to sink in. She had been completely, unequivocally blocked on every single platform. The pathetic failure she relied on to absorb her abuse was unreachable, and her bank accounts were dry. Brittany practically sprinted the 2 blocks to the luxury hotel where she had valeted her leased black Mercedes SUVs. Her lungs burned with the freezing Chicago air, but the cold was nothing compared to the icy terror gripping her chest. She sped all the way back to the sprawling suburban mansion they rented. The massive house sat at the end of a pristine cul-de-sac, a towering monument to their fake success. For the very first time, looking at the grand pillars and the sweeping driveway did not fill Brittany with pride. Jamal was lounging comfortably on the custom Italian leather sofa in the living room, wearing his silk pajamas in the middle of the afternoon. He was casually practicing his golf putt on the Persian rug, an unlit imported cigar hanging loosely from his mouth. "Get your computer right now," Brittany screamed, her voice echoing violently off the high ceilings. "Open the bank accounts, all of them." Jamal did not even flinch. He just rolled his eyes and took another slow practice swing. "Relax, babe, you are being hysterical. So a piece of plastic got a fraud alert. It happens to high net worth individuals all the time. The bank probably flagged it because you were spending too fast." "It was not a fraud alert, Jamal," Brittany shrieked, kicking off her designer heels and marching across the rug. "Madison had to pay for my facial. I was humiliated in front of everyone. I tried to call Cassidy to get our allowance. And she blocked me. She blocked my number, my Instagram, everything." "Open the damn portal." Jamal finally lowered his golf club, a flicker of genuine annoyance crossing his face. He walked over to the home bar, grabbed his sleek silver laptop, and flipped it open on the kitchen island. He typed in his credentials with an arrogant smirk, expecting to show his wife a screen full of comfortable numbers. He hit enter. The smirk melted off his face instantly. He blinked hard, leaning much closer to the high-definition screen, as if his eyes were deceiving him. Instead of the massive credit limits and the comfortable cash cushion they were accustomed to, the screen was a bloodbath of red text and warning icons. "This makes no sense," Jamal muttered, his hands suddenly shaking as he clicked frantically through the transaction history. The automated clearinghouse transfer was supposed to hit yesterday. "Where is the deposit?" He aggressively opened the corporate backing file. The screen displayed a stark, unfeeling message: "Account access terminated by principal director." Grace period expired. The anonymous safety net was gone. The mysterious entity that had paid their rent, funded their cars, and covered their massive overhead had simply unplugged them from the machine. "Call them!" Brittany gasped, clutching the edge of the marble island to keep her legs from giving out. "Call your brokerage, call whoever runs that fund. I do not have a direct number," Jamal yelled, his arrogant facade shattering. It was a blind trust. It was set up through a third-party management firm. They just handled the disbursements as long as I submitted the invoices. You told me you were a top-tier broker. Brittany cried, her voice cracking heavily. You said this was your executive expense account. You said you earned this. I do close deals. Jamal roared defensively, though his panicked eyes told a different story. The market is just transitioning. I needed capital to float us while I line up my next commercial project. They stared blindly at the screen, the horrific reality crashing down upon them. They were 30 years old, living in a house that cost $10,000 a month to rent, driving 2 cars that cost $3,000 a month to lease. And they had $42 to their name. It was shortly past midnight. The neighborhood was dead silent, the kind of absolute quiet only found in exclusive gated communities. Suddenly, a loud, aggressive banging echoed from the heavy mahogany front doors, shaking the entire house. Jamal nearly jumped out of his skin. The booming knocks reverberated through the empty, cavernous foyer, followed instantly by the harsh mechanical grinding of heavy machinery. Rhythmic flashes of intense amber light began sweeping across the living room walls, casting long, distorted shadows through the massive front windows. Jamal scrambled out of the office, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. He sprinted toward the grand entrance, his bare feet slipping slightly on the polished marble. He unlocked the deadbolt and threw the double doors wide open. 2 massive, duty tow trucks were backed directly up to the garage. 4 men wearing thick industrial winter coats and high-visibility yellow vests were moving with ruthless, practiced efficiency. "Hey!" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with absolute panic. He sprinted out into the freezing November night, wearing nothing but his thin silk pajamas and designer loafers. "Stop what you are doing right now. Get your hands off my cars." The men did not even pause. They continued aggressively securing the heavy metal hooks, the loud clanking metal echoing through the dead silent exclusive neighborhood. "I said stop," Jamal roared, stepping aggressively toward the closest tow truck. "This is a massive banking error. I am a top-tier real estate broker in this city. You are making a catastrophic mistake. Unhook those vehicles before I call the police, and have you all arrested for grand theft auto." The lead recovery agent, a man built like a brick wall with a thick gray beard, calmly stepped out from behind the G-Wagon. He did not look intimidated in the slightest. He pulled a heavy metal clipboard from his jacket and clicked on a tactical flashlight, shining the blinding white beam directly into Jamal's panicked face. "There is no error, sir," the agent stated, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "Your lender ordered an immediate repossession due to severe delinquency. The final grace period expired at midnight. These vehicles belong to the bank now." Jamal threw his hands up, desperately trying to maintain his alpha male facade, while shivering violently in the freezing wind. "You do not understand. My brokerage handles these payments through a blind corporate trust. The automated transfer was delayed by a holiday weekend." The agent lowered the flashlight and handed Jamal a thick stack of aggressively stapled default notices. "We do not take checks, buddy, and we do not care about your brokerage." The anonymous backer on this account terminated the agreement. "Your credit line is frozen and the balance is severely past due." The threat of police arriving with sirens blaring broke Jamal. His arrogant bravado instantly evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, shivering man in silk pajamas, holding a stack of worthless paper. Brittany stumbled out onto the front porch, clutching her designer robe tightly around her waist. She stared in absolute horror as the hydraulic lifts engaged, pulling her beloved AMG coupe onto the flatbed of the second tow truck. Across the street, exterior porch lights began flipping on one by one. The heavy, expensive curtains of the neighboring mansions twitched. The actual wealthy residents of the gated community were watching the spectacular, undeniable downfall of the loud, flashy couple they had always secretly despised. The diesel engines roared to life, and the tow trucks pulled out of the driveway, carrying the physical proof of Jamal and Brittany's fake wealth out of sight. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in the affluent gated suburbs of Chicago. Richard and Patricia were oblivious to the catastrophic storm racing toward their doorstep. The morning broke crisp and clear over their sprawling, custom-built colonial estate. Outside, a sleek black SUV rolled slowly down the pristine street, coming to a smooth stop directly in front of Richard and Patricia's wrought iron driveway gates. A man in a cheap, rumpled gray suit stepped out of the vehicle. Patricia threw open the heavy door, her face arranged in a mask of aristocratic fury. "I am the homeowner, and I want to know why you think you can simply march up to my front door without an appointment." "Are you Patricia or Richard?" the man asked flatly. He shoved a heavy manila envelope directly against her chest. "You have been served," he stated with mechanical indifference, turning on his heel and walking briskly back down the driveway. Patricia tore open the envelope. Bold black letters screamed across the very first page. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. Immediate eviction proceedings initiated. Her imported espresso cup slipped from her weakened grip, shattering against the marble floor. Patricia collapsed against the heavy wooden doorframe. The flawless, untouchable reality she had curated for decades was collapsing right in front of her eyes. Richard sprinted into his home office, aggressively snatched the phone, and dialed his private banker, a man he usually treated with smug condescension. "William, there is a massive mistake with my account," Richard barked, trying to inject authority into his trembling voice. "There is no mistake, Richard." The banker's voice was ice cold. "The principal director of the LLC contacted us directly. They have formally severed all ties with your accounts and terminated the backing agreement. We have zero legal standing to request funds from them." Richard felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. He dialed his closest golf partners and the corporate lawyers he knew. Every single call was immediately rejected or went straight to voicemail. His numbers had been blocked by the very elites he had spent decades trying to impress. Later that afternoon, Jamal and Brittany stumbled into Richard and Patricia's grand foyer. They had been forced to take a public bus to the suburbs. In a rational family, this would be the moment of reckoning. But this family was incapable of self-reflection. Their narcissistic minds functioned like defensive fortresses, instantly deflecting any personal accountability. They desperately needed a scapegoat. "This is all Cassidy's fault," Richard declared, pacing across the foyer. "If she had just liquidated her retirement accounts at Thanksgiving, like we demanded, we would have had the liquid cash to float these accounts. She knew we needed financial support, and she selfishly kept her money to herself." Patricia seized onto the narrative with absolute desperation. "Exactly, she saw us struggling and she walked right out the door. She is an incredibly selfish, bitter girl, Jamal, whose panic was reaching a boiling point over the forged secondary mortgage he had secretly taken out in Richard's name, saw an opportunity to save himself. He desperately needed a massive infusion of cash to pay off the secondary lender before federal authorities were notified. "She has a stable job," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a low, predatory pitch. "She works full-time at that logistics center. She can take out a personal signature loan. She could easily get approved for $60,000 if she leverages her retirement accounts." "But she will never agree to it," Patricia argued. "She blocked all our numbers." Jamal scoffed, a dark, ugly sneer forming. "She will agree if we do not give her a choice. We go to her workplace tomorrow morning. We find her manager. We embarrass her in front of her entire department. We make a massive public scene until she agrees to sign the loan applications just to make us leave." They gathered their coats and began plotting their ambush, convinced of their own supremacy. They believed they were going to march into a dusty warehouse and force a pathetic clerk into submission. The freezing morning wind whipped across the massive industrial park as a dented, rented, silver Kia Optima sputtered into the visitor parking lot. Jamal slammed the car into park, his knuckles stark white as he gripped the cheap steering wheel. He glared through the windshield at the structure looming in front of them. This was not the dusty, run-down storage shed they had pictured. The logistics center was a colossal, 500,000 square foot fortress of modern commerce. A towering wall of tinted glass formed the main corporate entrance. The sheer scale of the operation hummed with raw financial power. Jamal and Brittany stepped out of the cheap rental car and stormed toward the sleek sliding glass doors. They strode into the lobby and immediately froze. The grand atrium featured polished concrete floors, soaring 30-foot ceilings, and a massive living green wall. Jamal marched up to the desk, slamming his palm flat. "I need you to go to the back and fetch Cassidy," he demanded loudly. "Tell her it is a family emergency." The receptionist looked up, mildly annoyed. "Excuse me, sir, I do not have anyone listed as an inventory clerk by that name. Do you have an appointment?" Before the receptionist could press the silent alarm, a massive figure stepped out from the shadows of the security alcove. Donovan, the head of corporate security, moved with the silent, lethal grace of a former military contractor. "Sir, I am going to need you to step back from the desk immediately," Donovan stated, his deep voice commanding instant obedience. "We do not take unannounced personal visits. Exit the premises." Brittany ripped off her sunglasses. "You do not understand, we are her family. Tell her supervisor that Brittany is here, and she needs to come out this second." Donovan crossed his massive arms. "Lady, I do not care who you think you are. Now return to your vehicle before I have you officially trespassed." Jamal puffed out his chest. "Do you know who I am?" "I am a top-tier real estate broker in this city. You go get her right now, or I will personally make sure you lose your job." Donovan laughed, a cold, sharp sound. He looked out the glass doors at the parking lot. "A top-tier real estate broker in a rented Kia. Sure you are, buddy. The door is right behind you." Two more armed security guards stepped out from the adjacent hallway. Humiliated and powerless, Jamal and Brittany backed away and marched out the sliding doors. They practically ran back to the rented Kia. Jamal yanked his phone from his pocket with trembling fingers, dialing Richard. The external security cameras mounted on the facility wall tracked their every movement. High above the parking lot, sitting in her soundproof corner office, Cassidy tapped a key on her keyboard, turning up the external audio feed. "Richard, your useless daughter refuses to even come to the lobby." Jamal screamed into his phone. "You need to fix this right now." Through the phone speaker, Cassidy heard her father's frantic voice. "Jamal, forget about the warehouse. The bank just called me again. They are talking about a massive secondary lien on the house." "What secondary lien? We never authorized a home equity line of credit." Jamal froze, all color draining from his face. "Richard, listen to me," Jamal stammered, pacing frantically. "I had to do it. I just used your name on the application to secure the loan. It was supposed to be temporary. You forged my signature." Richard roared, his voice echoing through the speaker, with absolute, world-ending horror. "You committed federal fraud and attached it to my house. If the bank looks too closely at those documents, I am going to federal prison." Jamal yelled back, abandoning accountability. "You have to cover this. We need Cassidy's money right now, to pay off the secondary lender before they report the forgery." In her corner office, Cassidy smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile. She clicked her mouse, saving the high-definition audio and video, recording directly to a secure, encrypted cloud server. The trap had not just sprung. It had crushed them, miles away. Richard stood frozen in his mahogany-paneled home office. The phone pressed so hard against his ear that his knuckles turned stark white. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal threatened to stop his heart entirely. "You forged my signature on a federal bank document," Richard choked out, his voice dropping to a hoarse, terrified whisper. "You took out a second mortgage on my estate without my knowledge. Do you have any idea what you have done? The bank is going to audit the entire property." "Jamal, I was protecting the family image." Jamal bellowed back through the phone, pacing furiously around the rented Kia, while Brittany sobbed against the passenger door. "You think I wanted to do this? Your daughter demands a lifestyle. She demands the bags, the spa days, the vacations. I had to keep up appearances. A bridge loan is not stealing my identity. Richard roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson as he finally found his rage. You are going to prison, and you are dragging me down with you. The office door burst open. Patricia stood in the doorway, clutching her silk robe. Having heard Richard's terrified screams echoing through the empty, repossessed mansion, she marched forward with aggressive entitlement and snatched the phone, directly, from her husband's trembling hand. What is going on? Patricia demanded, her voice shrill and demanding. Richard collapsed into his heavy leather chair, burying his face in his hands. He took out a secondary mortgage on the house, Patricia. He forged my signature. Jamal is a felon. Patricia stared at her husband as the horrific reality washed over her. Any rational mother would have instantly demanded Jamal turn himself in to the authorities. Any rational human being would have recognized that Jamal and Brittany's unhinged greed had driven the final nail into their collective coffin. This is all Cassidy's fault, Patricia stated, her voice suddenly dropping into a chilling, venomous calm. Richard looked up through his fingers, bewildered. What? Patricia, Jamal forged my signature on a federal loan. He committed wire fraud. And why did he have to do that, Richard? Patricia snapped, pointing a manicured finger at the phone. Because your selfish, ungrateful daughter refused to help her own family. If Cassidy had just given us her retirement savings at Thanksgiving, Jamal would not have been backed into a corner. Through the speakerphone, Jamal eagerly latched onto this insane narrative. Exactly. I was pushed into this, Patricia. I was trying to save all of us from Cassidy's financial selfishness. Do not worry, Jamal. Patricia cooed into the phone, ignoring the fact that he had just committed severe identity theft against her own husband. We are going to make her pay for what she has done to this family. Patricia slammed the phone down on the receiver, hanging up on Jamal. Her eyes were wide, burning with a frantic, unhinged energy. She grabbed her own smartphone and furiously pulled up Cassidy's contact. She did not care that her calls had been blocked. In her corporate corner office, Cassidy watched the security feed as Jamal and Brittany finally climbed into their rented Kia and sped out of the industrial park in utter defeat. A moment later, the red voicemail indicator flashed steadily on her desk phone. Cassidy, you listen to me very carefully, Patricia's voice hissed through the speaker, trembling with barely contained fury. I know what you are doing. You intentionally forced Jamal into a financial crisis out of pure malicious jealousy. You are directly responsible for the legal trouble he is facing. Cassidy took a slow sip of her espresso, calmly marveling at the sheer terrifying scale of her mother's narcissism. The first voicemail ended. A second one immediately began playing. You are going to fix this today. Patricia shrieked, all pretense of maternal affection eradicated. You are going to march into your bank, empty every single account you have, and wire the funds to Jamal's lawyer. If you refuse to bail out your brother-in-law, I swear to God, I will drag you through the court system. A third voicemail dropped into the queue, heavy with desperate malice. You have 24 hours, Cassidy. You either pay off that secondary loan or you are dead to us. Cassidy deleted the voicemails with a steady, clinical press of her finger. Dead to them, that was the most beautiful promise they could have ever made. They were spiraling desperately, grasping blindly at straws, unaware that the net was about to aggressively close completely. The eviction notices were finalizing. It was finally time to pull the final string. She picked up her phone and dialed David, her wealth management attorney. David, it is time, I said, keeping my voice level as I stared out over the bustling warehouse floor through my soundproof office glass. Send the final settlement summons to all of them. Require their mandatory attendance at the downtown executive boardroom tomorrow morning. Understood, Cassidy, David replied smoothly. They will receive the courier summons by this afternoon. Shall I prepare the final asset forfeiture documents for the meeting? Have them printed and bound, I instructed, a cold smile forming on my lips. I want them legally cornered. By Thursday afternoon, the atmosphere inside the sprawling suburban estate was suffocating. The reality of their impending eviction had finally pierced through their collective delusion. The sheriff's deputies were scheduled to arrive on Friday at 5 o'clock to physically change the locks. Patricia was furiously shoving imported Italian silk bedsheets into cheap orange garbage bags. Richard was tearing aggressively through his home office, frantically shredding documents and throwing his collection of crystal Scotch decanters into empty liquor boxes. Suddenly, the sharp chime of the doorbell echoed through the chaotic foyer. All four of them instantly froze. Their eyes darted toward the heavy mahogany doors. Panic seized them instantly. They assumed it was federal agents coming to violently arrest Jamal for the forged secondary mortgage. Richard finally stepped forward, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. He pulled the heavy door open. It was not the police. Standing on the porch was a polished corporate courier, wearing a sharp charcoal suit and white gloves. He held a thick, heavy cream-colored envelope sealed with dark red wax. "Richard?" the courier asked, his voice professional. Richard stammered. Taking the envelope, the courier turned on his heel and walked back to a waiting Blacktown car. Richard closed the door and stared at the heavy envelope. Patricia, Brittany, and Jamal immediately swarmed tightly around him like desperate vultures. Richard cracked the thick wax seal with his thumb and pulled out a single sheet of heavy embossed cardstock. He read the typed text in silence. As his eyes quickly scanned the page, the color slowly returned to his face. His posture shifted entirely. "It is a summons," Richard announced, his voice vibrating with a sudden, foolish surge of hope. "It is from the principal director of the management fund, the anonymous CEO who controls our debt." Jamal aggressively snatched the paper from Richard's hands. He read the precise words, aloud for the rest of the room. "The principal director of Vanguard Financial Holdings requests the mandatory presence of all named debt holders for a final settlement negotiation." The room fell dead silent then. A collective delusional wave of profound relief washed over them. Their narcissistic minds instantly interpreted the word negotiation as a massive sign of weakness. They genuinely believed the faceless billionaire CCO was blinking. "They want to negotiate," Richard said, a smug, greedy smile spreading across his face. "These massive financial firms do not want the terrible publicity of throwing a prominent family out on the street. They want to aggressively structure a bridge loan." "Exactly," Jamal agreed, his chest puffing out as he forgot that he was facing federal wire fraud charges. "This is how high-level commercial real estate works. The CEO probably saw my portfolio and realized I am an asset. I will easily charm him into a 90-day extension." "We are saved." Patricia clapped her hands together, a manic, triumphant gleam in her eyes. "We just need to play this perfectly. We need to remind this director who he is dealing with. We are not some desperate charity case." Brittany wiped her tear-streaked face, her influencer persona snapping right back into place. "We need to look the part," Brittany declared, dropping her stack of designer shoes. "If we walk into that boardroom, looking like we are aggressively packing up our house, they will eat us alive." The sheer level of their absolute self-deception was staggering. They were facing total financial annihilation, yet they immediately began aggressively plotting how to manipulate the severe situation. They threw away their cardboard moving boxes and rushed to their massive closets. They spent the entire night aggressively hyping each other up, building an impenetrable fortress of arrogance. They convinced themselves they were about to outsmart a billionaire. They were entirely blind to the reality of their situation. The freezing wind whipped violently off Lake Michigan as the rented, dented Kia Optima pulled up to the curb of a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of the downtown Chicago financial district. Richard adamantly refused to let the building valet see him step out of such a pathetic vehicle. They aggressively stepped through the revolving doors into a vast, minimalist lobby lined with imported Italian marble and brushed steel. The security desk alone looked like a military control center. As the elevator swiftly shot up to the 60th floor, the tension inside the small steel box was wildly palpable. Patricia smoothed the precise wrinkles from her tailored dress, continuously practicing her aristocratic smile. The elevator sharply chimed, and the doors parted, revealing an empty, pristine reception area. There were no assistants to warmly greet them. There was no welcome staff. There were just floor-to-ceiling glass walls offering a dizzying, panoramic view of the sprawling Chicago skyline. They quickly walked in, their expensive leather shoes clicking loudly against the polished hardwood. The massive boardroom was a stunning masterpiece of absolute corporate intimidation. 9 o'clock came and slowly went. The large digital clock on the wall shifted to 9:15. The absolute silence in the massive room began to gnaw at their fragile, inflated egos. Richard tapped his gold pen against the oak table, his initial robust confidence slowly morphing into arrogant irritation. "This is a deliberate, aggressive power play," Richard grumbled, harshly adjusting his silk tie for the 5th consecutive time. Patricia tightly crossed her arms, her expensive pearl necklace clicking sharply against the polished wood. "It is incredibly unprofessional. They did not even offer us coffee or sparkling water. This entire firm severely lacks basic etiquette." Brittany pulled out her phone, checking her reflection in the dark screen since she had zero cellular service. She leaned over to her husband. "Jamal, remember the firm pitch. Do not aggressively let him repeatedly interrupt you. You take control of the intense conversation immediately." Jamal nodded, firmly, wiping a heavy bead of nervous sweat directly from his forehead. "I know what I am doing, Brittany. I am going to aggressively hit him with the macroeconomic data. I will forcefully explain that the real estate sector experienced an unforeseen, unprecedented market crash." Richard aggressively pointed his gold pen at Jamal. "Exactly. We maintain absolute authority. We proudly project nothing but immense wealth and absolute stability." They sat there in this quiet boardroom, feeding each other thick lies, reinforcing their shared profound delusion. They had forgotten the stark reality of their severe situation. The digital clock shifted to 9:30, the heavy tension grew thicker, suffocating the large room. Richard let out a loud, angry huff and placed his hands flat on the polished table, preparing to boldly stand up and loudly demand real answers from whoever was hiding in the private offices beyond the thick glass walls. Before Richard could push his chair back, the atmosphere in the room abruptly shifted. The heavy oak double doors, at the far end of the long corridor, clicked incredibly loudly. The sharp sound echoed through the empty reception area and aggressively pierced the dead silence of the boardroom. The elite family instantly unfroze. Sharp, rhythmic footsteps echoed against the polished hardwood floor outside. The severe sound was exceptionally distinct, authoritative, and devoid of any hesitation. Someone was aggressively approaching the massive boardroom with absolute, terrifying purpose. The tall figure that stepped decisively through the heavy oak doors brought the entire room to a sudden, violently jarring halt. It was Cassidy. She was not proudly wearing the faded discount sweater or the worn-out jeans they had mocked openly at Thanksgiving. She was draped in a $3,000, razor-sharp, tailored charcoal gray power suit. Flanking her on either side were two tall men who aggressively radiated an equally terrifying level of exceptional professional menace. On her right was David, her brilliant, cold-blooded wealth management attorney. The elite family sat intensely paralyzed. Their ingrained toxic bias created a massive, severe cognitive dissonance. They wildly assumed she was merely a low-level employee who had somehow foolishly stumbled directly into the wrong room. Richard Sharpley was the very first to break the stunned silence. The fake, charming smile he had prepared melted off his face, replaced rapidly instantly by an exceptionally ugly, contorted mask of furious indignation. "What the hell are you doing here?" Richard exploded, his voice booming violently with absolute fierce outrage. "Are you aggressively stalking us? Did you track us down to this massive building to loudly beg forcefully for money?" Cassidy aggressively did not ever flinch. She did not rapidly stop briskly walking. She simply continued her steady, measured pace directly toward the empty chair at the absolute head of the massive boardroom table. Patricia gasped, aggressively clutching her heavy pearls in a dramatic display of severe aristocratic horror. "This isn't private elite corporate floor, Cassidy." Patricia hissed. "Are you aggressively working in the cafeteria? Get out of here right now." Brittany let out a loud, shrill, mocking laugh. "You are literally insanely obsessed with my elite life. Strongly go back to your dusty warehouse and push your little cardboard boxes." Jamal strongly leaned aggressively forward, pointing an exceptionally aggressive finger at Cassidy. "You heard your father. Turn around and immediately walk out those heavy doors." Cassidy steadily reached the absolute head of the large table. She stood still, her hands resting lightly on the cool, polished oak surface. She looked at the four of them. For exceptionally 33 years, their fierce words would have crushed her deeply. Cassidy did not yell. She strongly did not aggressively raise her voice. She simply deliberately turned her head slightly to the right and gave a single, almost imperceptible short nod directly to David. The wealth management attorney stepped forward. Without a single word, he deliberately hoisted the massive, staggering stack of exceptionally heavy leather-bound folders up and strongly lifted them above the polished table. He let go. The thick documents slammed into the solid oak table with a deafening, truly thunderous thud that vibrated intensely through the floorboards. The sheer immense volume of paperwork spilled across the polished wood, sliding toward Richard's hands. Cassidy leaned intensely forward, resting her weight on her steady hands. She locked eyes intensely with her terrified father, her fierce gaze as cold and unforgiving as the freezing wind intensely whipping against the massive skyscraper windows behind her. "I am not the pathetic secretary," Cassidy stated. Her sharp voice was barely above a truly quiet whisper, yet it cut through the room with the force of a speed collision. "I am the exclusive owner of the house you currently live in," Cassidy intensely continued smoothly. "I am the sole owner of the elite limited liability company that has subsidized your fake luxurious existence for the past full 4 years." Cassidy slowly leaned closer across the polished wood. "And I am the principal chief elite director of the massive financial fund you just defaulted entirely on." The silence that rushed into the boardroom was a exceptionally suffocating tight vacuum that instantly drained the oxygen from their lungs. No one moved, no one blinked. Richard forcefully looked intensely down at the thick documents, resting barely inches from his trembling frozen fingers. The bold, stark black ink on the top thick page displayed the name of the anonymous corporate trust. Cassidy's exact name. The fierce game was entirely over. The massive fake grand illusion was dead. After the dramatic showdown, she bankrupts the family immediately. Jamal is arrested for federal wire fraud, involving the forged secondary mortgage. The parents are evicted and move into a rundown apartment. Brittany's influencer career implodes instantly, and she divorces Jamal. Cassidy's corporate legal team receives hundreds of tear-stained letters begging for forgiveness. David, following Cassidy's strict instructions, returns every single envelope unopened, stamped with a bold red "Return to Sender." The script ends with Cassidy standing on the steel catwalk of her massive fulfillment center. She watches her empire roar with life, recognizing that family isn't about the toxic people who share your blood. It's about the people who respect you and never require you to buy a seat at their table.